Hello again. Welcome back. While this channel is about freak accidents and misadventures, there are certain events that are so unbelievable, so extraordinary, that it almost feels as though all of the planets have aligned just for such an incredibly rare incident to occur. When I researched this case, I noticed that some articles from 1923 got dates wrong. Others got the subject's age wrong. Some reports took liberties with how the event was told, resulting in facts being changed, while other reports left out essential information that news consumers would have benefited from having. Fast forward to 2024, and countless content creators have continued to regurgitate this story on all social media platforms, but the same issues are occurring and the same misinformation is being shared. So I decided to not only collect all of the information from today's creators and modern news articles relating to the story and pour through their details, but I also decided that I needed to pull every archived news article from various dates in June 1923 that reported on the event I'm about to tell you about, in order to compare all of the evidence so that I could learn what was actually true from that time. I feel the need to express that when gathering information, it's important to pick through all the sources available, because even within outlets that aren't especially reputable, you still might find slivers of truth that coincide with your trusted sources. Today's episode isn't a complicated story. In fact, if you Google the topic, you'll find it to be an incredibly brief, straightforward event with no meat to it, no complexity. But if you were to combine all of the sources, both from the days of yore and modern reports, this is when cells begin to divide and the flesh begins to appear beneath the suit of skin that we're consuming. So, let's pull back the curtain now to reveal the extraordinary story of Frank Hayes and a kiss so sweet that it carried him home. It was the early 20th century, and some articles say that Frank Hayes was born in New York to an Irish-American family, but others say that he was born in Ireland and then migrated to New York at the age of 15. Regardless of where he was born, it seems Frank was born to do one incredibly special thing: racehorses. But he was just as inexperienced as he was young and eager, and so the only place to start in such an exclusive activity was at the bottom, and Frank was absolutely fine with that. Now, I can't flood you with all of the nuances of Frank's life because he happened to be just one of around 200,000 Irish immigrants living in New York at the time. I'm sure he had friends, and I would assume he went to school, but maybe he didn't. Maybe he was a teenage hustler. He could have been an ideal student or a fighter in school. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any of that recorded anywhere, but what I did learn was that Frank's mother's name was Margaret. His father's name was John. He had 2 sisters, May and Margaret, and 3 brothers, Patrick, Daniel, and John. I also don't know where his brothers, one of his sisters, or his father went. Surely they all lived together at some point. Maybe some were older and had moved out and gone to college, or had been married off, but it was recorded in an article from 1923 that it was just Frank who was living with his mother and his sister at that time. But back to starting at the bottom. In Brooklyn, New York, resided a renowned steeplechase trainer by the name of James K. Frayling. Now, wouldn't Sam Hill is a steeplechase, you ask? It's a distance horse race, sometimes in the countryside, sometimes on a track, where competitors must jump a variety of fence and ditch obstacles. It's primarily conducted in Ireland, where it originated, as well as in Great Britain, Canada, the United States, Australia, and France. The steeplechase kicked off in Ireland in the 18th century, and thoroughbred horses raced cross-country for several miles, usually from church steeple to church steeple, hence the name steeplechase. And so, James K. Frayling was a steeplechase trainer, and the man who employed Frank Hayes, our Frank Hayes, at the age of 18, because according to most accounts, Frank had worked for Frayling for 4 years before his big break arrived. Frank was a stableman and went through the rigors of becoming a trainer, galloping and schooling horses over jumps, but like a cleaner maintaining a boxing ring, who has visions of winning a belt and soaking in the cheers and adoration of a packed stadium, training horses only stoked Frank's desire to cross the line and become a jockey himself. It was reported that Frank was well liked, a favorite in the saddle room and stable with everyone who had the pleasure of interacting with him, and it was evident to all that he took great pride in what he felt was his calling, even before he was able to realize his dream. But everyone could see that it indeed was his hope to achieve that dream. And at one point, after 4 long years of being a stableman for James Frayling, at the ripe old age of 22, Frank had an opportunity to race. Really race. He was a brand new jockey, of course, so it wasn't as if all of New York planned on showing up to put all of their money on him, but on this particular fresh spring day, he knew this was the real deal. No more preparation, no more dreaming. Frank climbed into his gleaming racing silks like a young matador preparing for his first battle, and he entered the arena, which was the Havre de Grace racetrack in Maryland. And I don't doubt for a minute that he put his heart and soul into every inch of that course, believing in himself and believing that he could win. But he didn't, and that's okay. He knew that just like everything else in life, you have to start somewhere, and he did. He did it. His first race. I can only imagine how excited he was to be one of those jockeys, racing alongside all of those other experienced, shining performers, uniforms glimmering in the bright light of day, and he must have been rabid to do it again, to do it immediately, aching to be filled again with the adrenaline that dreams bursting with success bring. And so, within that very same spring season, Frank set out to make that dream come true, once again. Soon after Frank's less than successful very first race, he went to his employer, made a beeline straight to Mr. Frayling, and expressed his desire to race again. And Frayling wasn't against the idea, but here's where reports become misty again. I read in one report that Mr. Frayling's sister, Miss A.M. Frayling, had a horse that she intended to put into a race, but her preferred jockey was unable to keep his commitment, and so she took a chance and allowed Frank to take his place. Other reports completely omit Miss Frayling from the equation and say that Frank begged his employer to race again, and Mr. Frayling assented to his plea. Both can be simultaneously true, as a matter of fact, but this is what I mean by stripping every source one can find in order to discover further shreds of information to build a more complete picture. What we do know, for a fact, is that regardless of however the circumstances arose, Frank was allowed to race Miss A.M. Frayling's horse at the Belmont racetrack in Elmont, New York in the end, a horse named Sweet Kiss. Through my research, I discovered a Facebook page which was created by racing enthusiasts to remember the past, present, and future of horse racing, while also celebrating the life of Lady's Secret, an American Eclipse award-winning thoroughbred race mare that was listed in the top 100 U.S. racehorses of the 20th century. And it was here that I learned more about Sweet Kiss, the horse that carried our Frank off to victory. Sweet Kiss was 7 years old when she first broke her maiden, as the lingo goes, in the steeplechase race that Frank and she experienced together. More confusion here, though. It was 𝗦𝗧𝗏𝗧's very first race, supposedly, but it was reported elsewhere that she was a winning jumper, and it was Frank's first time riding a winning horse. But then I learned that 𝗦𝗧𝗏𝗧 came off at 20-to-1 odds in a race of 5 horses, most likely because it was her first race, and also because Frank was still a brand new jockey with no wins to his name. I also ended up learning that 𝗦𝗧𝗏𝗧 was foaled in 1916, and her name was actually inspired by her mother's name, which was Kissing Cup, and of course she was owned by James Frayling's sister, Miss A.M. Frayling. I also learned that 𝗦𝗧𝗏𝗧 was assigned to carry 130 pounds in the jumping race, which does indeed appear to be a fact because when Frank asked his boss if he could race again and 𝗦𝗧𝗏𝗧 was brought up, Mr. Frayling said, "You'll need to cut down your weight." This reality, at least, is universally accepted. The Lewiston Sun-Journal newspaper wrote that Frank went at the task of losing weight with the devotion of a fanatic, and his meals scarcely would have sufficed for an anchorite. In order to make that weight, Frank had to drop 10 to 15 pounds in less than 24 hours. Some articles said 10, others said 12, others said 15, so 10 to 15 pounds it was. Apparently Frank was seen spending several hours on the road, jogging off surplus weight enveloped in sweaters, Rocky style, denying himself water and food, which resulted in him becoming incredibly weak and tired by the time he finally climbed into the saddle on the day of the race. It makes me think of bodybuilders, wrestlers, boxers, cyclists, even models rapidly dropping water weight for weigh-ins or before runway shows or before competitions in order to look more shredded or to become more streamlined or more lightweight or to become faster to gain an advantage. There's no limit to the extreme rigors people are willing to put their bodies through in order to look the best or have a better chance at winning, and Frank was no different. He had his eye on the prize. He was an extremophile, in a sense, but he had no one helping him, no instruction on how to reduce his weight quickly and safely. He just took matters into his own hands, and the result was he did do it. He did achieve what he needed to at the weigh-in, but he also caused incredible stress to his body in the process. On the morning of the race, as 22-year-old Frank left his home to head to the track in Belmont Park, his mother Margaret said, "I hope you win, and take care of yourself." And she wiped away her tears with her apron. She had told a reporter after the event that she hated seeing her son as a jockey, and that Frank's heart was weak, and because of this she feared some disaster. Considering the way Frank had treated his heart the day before, he had done it no favors. The race. I'll be sharing some vintage photographs with you now of the Belmont Park racetrack in New York, but to be clear, these are not images from the day Frank raced, which was on June 4th, 1923. Now that we know what we know, I think it's safe to say we can all imagine how Frank must have been feeling when he arrived at the track, because others noted he looked weak and tired when he got into the saddle of 𝗦𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏𝗧. But the bleachers were packed, and the white noise of an excited crowd of thousands swirled in the air. Though they weren't there for Frank, they were there to cheer on a beloved favorite, a racing horse named 𝗦𝗵𝗵𝗏. 𝗦𝗵𝗏's odds were 3 to 5 versus 𝗦𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏's 20 to 1, and everyone knew who to put their money on, so everyone readied themselves for a gloriously easy win. A win that never came. This was a 4-minute race spread over a 2-mile track with 12 jumps, and it was recorded that the race was quite the nail-biter. And we're off to the races All fatigue and weakness must have drained from Frank's body as his passion kicked in. The time was now. All 5 horses launched together, but soon it was clear that little to no air could pass between the bodies of 𝗦𝗵𝐸 and 𝗦𝗨𝗜𝗧. So close they were on track. 𝗦𝗵𝐸 was unable to shake off 𝗦𝗨𝗜𝗧 no matter how her jockey pushed and strained. The sound of hooves thundering beneath a clear sky, mud flying up and caking the legs of the jockeys, the incredible cacophonous screams of the frenzied masses, the hyper-focus of the riders, silks shimmering in the sun, every muscle taut and clenched with a white-knuckled grip on the reins as each horse breathing heavily, straining for more oxygen, pushed to their limit. Frank kept his mare in close attendance of the crowd favorite, pushing and pushing. 2 or 3 lengths was the most separating the 2 leaders at any given moment during the entire race, and 𝗦𝗨𝗜𝗧 was just behind 𝗦𝗵𝐸 as they rounded the last run, battling to the wire, and incredibly, 𝗦𝗨𝗜𝗧 was driven forward by the hand of fate and driven so close to 𝗦𝗵𝐸 that the 2 mares nearly collided as 𝗦𝗨𝗜𝗧 moved forward into the lead. 𝗦𝗨𝗜𝗧 quickly straightened back into her lane, and by some reports put even greater distance between them by 2 full lengths as the 2 came to their last jump. But by other reports, it was 𝗦𝗵𝐸 who made such a strong challenge that Frank had to ride like he was possessed to keep up front. But regardless of what had actually taken place, in true fact, 𝗦𝗨𝗜𝗧 broke free of her place just half a breath behind 𝗦𝗵𝐸 and summoned enough reserve to carry herself and her rider miraculously across the line by a full length and a half in a stupendous finish. The massive thousands in attendance lost their collective mind in the bleachers, some cheering at the new jockeys for success while others howled at their unbelievable misfortune, but the roar was too great to differentiate between the 2, and as 𝗦𝗨𝗜𝗧 pulled on the brakes after racing through the finish line, the crowd laughed as Frank, who was leaning over 𝗦𝗨𝗧𝗧's neck, appeared to slip from the saddle and stumble out of his stirrups, after which his body loudly thumped to the ground. 𝗦𝗨𝗧𝗧's owner, Miss A.M. Frayling, and her brother James Frayling, the man who had given Frank a chance and had employed him for 4 years as a stableman, rushed over to celebrate this young jockey's success. But in one report, Hayes momentarily faltered in the saddle, and 100 yards beyond the finish, he pitched to the ground. Wild applause from the grandstand turned to laughter briefly because they thought that he had tumbled awkwardly from the mount. But then a sense of tragedy came swiftly to the crowd as the figure of the jockey in his bright-colored silks lay limply where he had fallen. The Auburn Citizen newspaper also described the following day. Hayes was valiantly but weakly tugging at the bridle as death gripped his heart and the mists swam before his eyes. 𝗦𝗨𝗜𝗧 cantered 100 yards further and stopped. The jockey crumpled in the saddle, slipped slowly over the mount's sides, and fell face downward and lay still. Dr. John A. Voorhees, track physician, hurried to the fallen jockey to administer first aid, but it was too late. "Heart disease," was his comment. All records say that Frank's death was instantaneous and was pronounced so immediately by Dr. Voorhees. Some report the doctor saying heart failure or attack of the heart, while others say he said heart disease. I find the human brain so odd because all of the mistiness and varying accounts in this event explain why witness accounts in crimes can never be trusted unless other people have witnessed the very same thing. But even then, perception can differ so greatly, you're never 100% positive as to what truly happened. Ever, really. Another report stated, when 𝗦𝗨𝗧 gracefully leapt the last barrier and straightened out for the run to the wire, Hayes was seen swaying in the saddle. He slipped to one side and then recovered. Attendants hurried toward him when the race had ended, but he then toppled to the track before they reached him. But no other newspapers had reported seeing Frank struggling and straightening himself during the race, or as he approached the finish line. It's only one, but everyone was watching him as he pulled up to the finish line. We can't know for certain at exactly which moment Frank's heart gave out, but I desperately prayed while researching the race that the moment he gave in came seconds after he realized he had won. I hoped that As soon as he had built enough space between himself and Gimme to know that the glory he had dreamt of for 4 long years would finally be his, that it was only then that he allowed his body to succumb to the crushing pressure, which might have been the case. People and animals have been known to hang on while on the cusp of death for a loved one to arrive, or for a phone call to come, or for a dream to be achieved. The very power of the spirit is recondite and ineffable. The Brooklyn Daily Eagle wrote, "The Grim Reaper paid a sensational visit to the Belmont Park track yesterday. Indeed, it did." Frank's body was collected by the Queen's Country Turf Aid Society, and his death was said to have been caused by severe training, resulting in rapid weight reduction combined with the excitement of riding his first winner, which also indicated that this wasn't 𝗦𝗫𝗃𝗧𝗏's first race, and she was indeed a winner contrary to other reports. All of these discrepancies must be noted in order to demonstrate how inconsistent reporting was in the 20s, which really hasn't much changed with the reporting today. Frustrating, but that seems to be the only consistency in this ocean of inconsistency. But all irregularities aside, there are threads of truth running through every account, and what we know for sure is that Frank Hayes had only run his very first race that spring of 1923, and it was still spring when Frank won his winning steeplechase race. So he wasted no time getting back on the track, and we know from the words of Frank's mother, Margaret, that she feared for his life because she already knew that he had a bad heart, and then jeopardized it by pushing it to its limits even before he got on his horse. There was a requiem mass in St. Paul's at 9:30 a.m., and Frank's mother's house was banked with flowers and tokens of esteem from the boys of the turf. And on the day of his funeral, many famous jockeys were in attendance. Most articles claim that he had only worn his racing silks twice, but his body was dressed in those winning silks, his boots, his jacket, and the cap he wore on the day he died in the saddle as his casket moved through the city. 6 of Frank's best friends were among the jockeys who also attended his funeral, arriving in full racing togs, and it should be noted that it was clear that Frank's mother knew the risks her child was taking, and she hated those risks, and she feared this day would come, but she never stopped her son from chasing his dream, regardless of whatever the outcome might be. Her pain must have been excruciating when the news reached her on the day of his death, but I have to imagine that her pride must have, even for just a brief moment, eclipsed her pain. Because how many people in the history of human existence have been able to die doing what actually brings them the greatest joy? And Frank Hayes had lived and died for that very moment. Frank was outlived by his mother, his father, his 2 sisters, and his 3 brothers. And he's a legend. To this day, he remains the only dead man to actively win at a competitive sport. Hard act to beat. Regarding 𝗦𝗫𝗃𝗧𝗏, apparently Miss A.M. Frayling encountered some difficulty when looking for other jockeys to ride her, so she ended up retiring her mare with an incredible record, if we're to believe she had only raced once, that record being 1 race, 1 win, 1 death. The nickname 𝗦𝗫𝗃𝗧𝗏 instantly spread among jockeys and the public alike, which surely didn't help matters, though the horse had nothing to do with Frank's demise whatsoever. So I'd like to believe that 𝗦𝗫𝗃𝗧𝗏 was able to live a life of luxury well into her twilight years. And yet another haze befell the reporting of this incredible event, which arose in multiple articles. Some newspapers claimed that Frank was 35, but others said that he was 22. I found his birth date, 1901, so if he had died in 1922 but was somehow 35, the math ain't mathin'. But there's only one true verified picture of Frank Hayes, and this is it. All of the other pictures on the internet that claim to feature him have no basis in fact. They haven't been verified or proven to actually be him because they weren't included in a single newspaper article that I found. If this incredible race had been recorded, the pictures would have been plastered all over every newspaper. But several of the images that you can find on the internet that are attached to the Frank Hayes story that claim to be him have actually been proven to be other jockeys and pictures taken on different dates, even on different racetracks. There's even one photograph from the Keeneland Library that claims this is Frank on 𝗦𝗫𝗃𝗃 during the actual race, but I find this rather unbelievable because even the Keeneland Library noted that photographers of this time period did not specialize in steeplechase coverage, so the likelihood that this would be the one and only magical picture of both Frank and 𝗦𝗫𝗃𝗃 in existence on that day is extremely unlikely. Plus, the other men in all of these pictures just look too old to be Frank, who was only 22. So the reality is, this is our Frank. No other authenticated images exist from the race that day, and all other pictures shown of other men and all of the other videos made by other creators are not our Frank. I really wish I could have raked up more images of Frank, and trust me, I scoured the internet. Alas, they remain elusive. So, I have nothing more to leave you with but Frank's extraordinary dream that he managed to transform into a reality against all odds. And I can leave you with this closing line made by an especially poetic reporter of the time. Frank Hayes raced over hurdles and water to the great beyond, where all must fall across the finish line. In that moment of glory, while his body rested slack on the back of success, his spirit willed his 𝗦𝗫𝗃𝗃 on. As always, thanks for sharing your time with me. If you'd like to see more of these videos, like and subscribe, as I'll be releasing a new video every week. And never forget, the choices we make could prematurely lead to the last breath we take. So for the love of all the deities, choose carefully. And remember, no one is actually dead until the ripples they cause in the world die away.